do. That's true. Right, a rough turn the piece, but I think what I'm going to do is mount it in the tenon. I think what I'll do is dress this bottom section so that it's a cylindrical shape. I'm going to use a rough and gouge to clean up this surface, make it parallel the cylinder. You can hear and you can feel and hear the tips are not coming off uniformly. So it was pretty much out of round. Not perfectly round, but I just wanted to get the bottom where it was cylindrical shape to the tenon. And yeah, this will be the bottom of the lighthouse, and I'll do a little bit of work to it, but not much. Most of the tapering will be done in this center section. So right now, I'm going to go ahead and part off the top section from the base. Use a parting tool. And some people can go ahead and cut it all the way off. I tend to get it close and then take a cut-off saw. So, since I do have two different scroll chucks, I will leave the top mounted. I'll just go ahead and pull this off of the lathe. Second scroll chuck. I'm going to go ahead and clean up the surface here so that when I bore, the point has a nice center to go to. Good. So now I go back to my inch and a 16th. All right. Turn your speed down. And basically, I'm going to back bore this. So if you don't go about an inch speed, I go fairly quickly. The tips are going to continue to clear until it intersects the hole. So now I'm going to check the other board. Now it's completely bored through. All right, so now I can true up the surface and go ahead and start my roughing and finish cuts. Turn the speed up. Most of this can be done with a roughing gouge. It gives a really good surface. Take it slowly. What I'm now going to do is tape this down, but before I do that, I want to measure and find out where the low spot. So the low spot is going to be right about here. And again, the drawing has it identified. And so I've got a caliper that should be set close to that minimum setting. And that'll be somewhere around here. So I'll mark it. I should take a bidet and I can get close to the depth I'm looking for. It's quite a bit. So that ways to go. But you don't want to go too far, obviously. So now I'm going to go ahead and just start tapering. This is the cylinder, and about from this point forward, I'm going to go ahead and start tapering down. And the nice thing is this does not have to be an exact dimension replace replica of what I originally did. You just look for a pleasant curve here, and then a taper that goes towards a minimum portion at this point here, and then you have your base that supports the top of your lighthouse. And you can play with that to your heart's content, but as you watch the music all morning, I'm going to call it pretty close to where I want. The next section that you're going to have is the top of the lighthouse that holds the base, and so it layers out. Let's see, that's view. I guess I have front view. So this basically tapers out to support the rest of the lighthouse, and for that I'll use a spindle gouge. Before I do that, I need to have the top, the mating piece flat, so I'm going to go ahead and take a cut straight across towards the center here. Backed out the live center so that I don't pull in the dip. Okay, so this surface here at the end is flat. That'll mate up with the top, and it ought to be parallel. And you put the tenon to the top piece in and rotate. So the next section is if you have about 1/8 of an inch straight, and then you taper in toward the low point. But I will need to take this dimension down because it is the full base dimension and it shouldn't be that tall. Yeah, that should be 2 1/16. So take a caliper. You can see that I've got quite a bit of room, so I can true up this base, or the top of the base. And again, none of it has to be exacting. Yes, the only thing that is exacting about this is where you bore it and your tenon fits into the top to the bottom base. So I'm going to call that close. A little bit more off, and then we're going to go ahead and do our final. Social distancing over here, but evidently our neighbor is starting to mow his yard. So if you hear a lawnmower in the background, that's what that is. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get the flare of the top of the base completed. Thank you. All right, so these are fairly sharp edges, so I'm going to go ahead and round them off a little bit. Okay. I'm going to go back to the rough and gouge to made up with this. Okay, I call that a final shape, and then you could take sandpaper. One thing you can't do in our demonstrations is do a lot of sanding, and I'm not going to do a lot because it's kind of boring, but you can get a really nice smooth transition if you sand out any imperfections that you may have. I'm not going to do any more sanding than this. But that's my base. This is the original. Looks fairly close. You can do embellishing. In this particular case, I usually put 2 bands in the back. I'll use a skew to make a groove. 2 grooves here, one there, one there, and then with a fairly high speed. I take a piano wire with little pommels on it. And just burn. So at this point, I'm finished with the top, and we'll come back to it. We'll use it actually as a jam chuck to finish out the top of the lighthouse. So I'm going to remove this. All right, so top, this happens to be the other top. You can see that even though I bored it out with an 1 1/16", this top doesn't fit it. So this top to it. And so what I'm going to need to do is measure the board opening in the base and cut a tenon for the top of the lighthouse to fit in, or the top of the pepper grinder. Usually leave about a 3/4 inch deep tenon, and so I'm going to go ahead and measure. Now, when I cut this tenon, I'm going to want it to fit snug, but not so tight that you can't get it out. So right now, I'm going to use a Badan just to go ahead and get the dimension down. Yeah, I've got about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch on either side. So again, I can get this roughed out. And that'll be the tenon. So now what I need to do is get the tenon to fit the base. And I've got the dimension here. And what I typically do is I will get a parting tool, and I will start approaching the dimension on the end. Trial and error, and I've got way more material removed than I. But you got to remember, when you take a material off one side, you're taking it off twice the thickness because it's coming off the front and the back. And every once in a while, you get surprised that you actually got smaller than you expected. So that's one reason I just do a small section of this. And if I don't get it right, I just cut it off and extend the tenon further. That's pretty close. Let me get the rest of it in the same basic dimension. Then I'll go ahead and finalize that tenon setting. This, the face here on this, you got your tenon, and the bottom of the lighthouse base is going to have to mate up with the top of the base, and you want that parallel. So I'm going to go ahead and take a nice clean cut with a spindle gouge, and then I will start checking the tenon. even though I measured it, I always go back to the original and just make sure that I haven't gone too far. Actually, the first 1/16 of an inch actually slips in there pretty good, so I'm really close on that. There are different ways of doing tenons. What I do is I use a spindle gouge and I do a shear cut, and I feel like I get a pretty good fit. Hard to put wood back on. And see, I've got it pretty tight and pretty loose up to that point, so I probably went too far trying to do it too quickly. All right, so now I'm gonna make this part where it actually acts as a jam chuck and allow me to do. Okay, that looks like it's going to fit up pretty good. And again, it doesn't have to be extremely tight because I'm going to use it as a jam chuck, but I'm also going to use a live center to hold it in place. So right now I can take this out of the scroll chuck and put it in the base. Now I'll mount that whole assembly. All right, so I actually jumped this. I jumped a step because I was supposed to bored out the hole for the center of the mechanism, or the rod that goes through your.
Take it up and do it now.
So this is for the mechanism. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and bore the high speed for drilling. And again, the same thing when you're drilling a hole. As you drill the hole, at first the chips come out real quickly, and then they basically fill up the flute. And it's all clean. Take one final. What happened was I backed it too far off, and that came off the Okay. So now I've got the top of the lighthouse mounted in the base. I take a live center with a cone, put it in that center hole. And now I'm going to turn the lighthouse to its maximum diameter. And I do know that the 2 1/4 is at the top where the roof line is. So all right. So Now I can take the badan. Turn down to about the 2 1/4. That'll be the roof one. And since the badan doesn't take as nice a cut as the rough gouge, I'm going to go ahead and go back to rough gouge through up the rest of it. On English gouge, right? But does a great job. Gives a good finish. All right, so we're going to start working on the shape of the lighthouse top portion. I don't know if that shows up or not.
Towards the headstock, just a little bit, right there. That's it.
Yeah, so these are the dimensions. Again, they're on that PDF. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working from the base and where the handrail is, and then the inset where the glass for the lighthouse is, and then the roof. We'll do that. And then after we get this all shaped up and embellished on the lathe, there'll be a quick video on embellishing the roof. So the bottom portion of this lighthouse is very close. So I'm going to go ahead and just screw this up. And then I think it says it's 7/16, so it's almost a 1/2 inch. Rule. It's 7/16. So this will be the top of the railing for the porch that goes around the circumference of the lighthouse, and then from there it indents into where the lighthouse glass is. So I'm just going to go ahead and take a know where that goes. So now, in order to make this made up a little bit nicer, I'm going to go ahead and basically taper the bottom of this to the base. Okay, so this would be where the handrail is, and the offset inward is where the porch goes, and looks like the inset is 1 1/4. I'm sorry, 2 1/4 inches. So I've got a little bit further I can go in. That's pretty close. Okay, so I'm going to call that correct. Then the glass area is about 1 5/8. So the glass portion goes to this point here. And again, I can use the Bedan to cut that down. Okay, so the roof overhangs the glass area, and now what I'll do, I'll round that off. Then what we'll do is start working on the roof. I'll leave a nub, which is where the nut goes for the top of the adjusting mechanism of the pepper grind. And I gotta go ahead and round that up a little bit. So we got the top section made. It's kind of a plain look. So what I did was I went ahead and made a handrail, and there's a couple ways to do it, but what I chose to do was use burning again to burn the 2 railings that go in this area here, and then the top and the bottom of the window frame. So I'm going to put those in. These are the handrails. And again, it doesn't really show up that well until you define it. I'll take a burning wire, go with the heaviest one that I've got. And that's the lighthouse glass. And then there's the railings. But the railings need to be held up by something. And so what I do is I take a it's a permanent marker, and it's a basically Indian ink pen, and you can get them at the arts and crafts store. Any one of them will work. My lathe happens to have an index, so what I do is I put the index on 0, and then I use the steady rest to put in the handrail. So I just draw a straight line across, and then I go in increments of 12, 8. Okay. So every 8, I think there's 48 total. I know you can't see this, but you'll see the effect in a minute. So I'm at 32. So the next one's 40. And you can see that they're kind of spaced out a little bit too far, so I think I'm just going to go ahead and put them in between. So I'm going back and do them every 4. I saw somebody put a saw blade here, and then use the blade themselves as indexes. It looked pretty ominous when you first looked at it, thinking, well, that's kind of dangerous to turn, but you're not really turning it; you're just using it as an index. I think that was Rick Stone did that. He had a photo. Rick, you might put that on the website, but when I first saw it, I said, boy, that looks awful dangerous, and then I realized what he was trying to do. All right, so for the glass, we obviously don't want, all these lines right there. So I basically just divided it into 4 areas. So there's a total of 48. So 48 divided by 4 is what, 12? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So I've got 12, and I put a line. 24, which is the next increment. And 36. And then the last. So, there I've got my equally spaced increments. In order to have the appearance of there being a light, we haven't really figured out a nice, good, clean way to put a real light in there that would shine, which would really look awesome. What I did was I took a Forstner bit and I bored out a hole on each side of the lighthouse in between one of the windows, and then went to the craft store and got some faceted rhinestones. A packet of these will cost you $7, and I think there's 72 of them. So if you want to do this, let me know. And I've got probably about 70 more than I need. But basically, what you do is you bore out that hole. You can either do it by hand. I happen to have a drill that will mount on my banjo, and I can bore it out. I'm not going to do it now. It just takes too much time to get that set up. But you bore it out, and then basically epoxy the jewel in on both sides, and it gives the appearance of there being some sort of a light inside your lighthouse. So this is the lighthouse that I did before this demonstration, and this is the one I did for the demonstration. They're not exact, but they both look good. I like them. I think the other thing that you need to know is that I did put this in pretty tight, and so if you take your piece off That one's still a little bit tight. So what you can do to correct that is I just basically take a little sandpaper, you run it through here, and it'll loosen up in a heartbeat. Let me go ahead and do that heartbeat. Just that much should loosen up. Yeah, much better. And of course, when you have the rod and the tension, it'll hold it in place. And again, you don't want it binding at the top. You can get rid of some of that squeaking by using some beeswax. You know, it won't cake up with the pepper. So right now I've got a fairly plain top. And you can see I wanted something that looked a little bit like a shingle material. And so there's a quick video that I guess will be online as well. But they're going to go ahead and show now that show how I take a little burning tip pyrography and decorate the top of the lighthouse. And then after that, we'll take questions. This is going to be a quick video just to describe how I burn the shingle pattern in the top of the lighthouse. I do this using a wood burning system. I use a Optima 1 heat source, power source to heat the tip. Then I've got the razor tip tool. Let's see, there we go. And I made my own element, and I'll show you how I made the element, and then we're going to go ahead and do a little burning. And this is just sort of a quick introductory. So let's get started. First of all, in order to get that pattern, what I did was I took some nitronic wire, and I used nitronic 19 gauge. This is some nitronic 20. It comes in a roll, and the source will be on my PDF. You can get that on the website. So anyway, so you start out with wire. You cut a section of wire long enough to wrap it around, or an eighth inch drill bit. And I make 3 rounds, and let's see if I can get a good close-up picture of this. There, so, and I make 4 rounds, and I leave enough of a tail so that I can terminate it into the end of a tip. And I'll show you the tip here. This is the tip, and it has a screw on both sides, so you basically put one under the tip on each of the terminals, tighten it down, and then when you turn on your heat source, that's what heats up, and this surface here is what gives me the pattern I'm looking for. I started on this piece earlier, and just to sort of show what the pattern is going to look like. Let's see if I can get a... So you can see basically what I do is I take the burning tool, and I will make a spot where I heat it with the coils parallel to the rim, and then I do move over perpendicular to the rim, parallel, perpendicular, alternate all the way around the outside of the roof. And then in order to do the next row, if I did this one parallel to the rim, then I do it perpendicular to the rim for the next row. And it's important to know that as you start getting closer and closer to the center, you end up having to drop a row or a pass, because going around the peripheral, I might be able to have like 25 burns, and by the time I get to the center, I'll only have 15. So obviously, I will have fewer turns to make that happen. So what I'm going to do is turn on the unit and show you what this looks like. It takes a few seconds for the tip to heat up. This last one that I did was parallel to or perpendicular to the rim, so I'll rotate it around, and you can see the smoke starting to occur, and you basically just alternate the direction. And the nice thing is, on this particular pattern, it doesn't really matter how exacting you are. This is on the roof of a building that's you're just trying to get the impression of what's going on. Obviously, the better job you do of getting these parallel to each other, the easier it is to hold the pattern and make it look uniform. You will need to do this in a well-ventilated area. If you do it inside the house, you could set off your smoke detector. As you can see, it does have quite a bit of smoke. When you end up with this, you can see it's a fairly dark piece. It's easier to see. This is the finished piece, and this is the one I'm working on. So you can see I did a little bit of brushing of the charred area, and so I wanted to describe that a little bit. If you do just the raw area, it is very dark, and it's really hard to see. You can take a wire brush, and this is what it looks like when you do a wire brush. And if you want the impressions to stand out a little bit more, you can sand, and it'll sand away some of the char and give you a more defined surface. So, you know, kind of whatever you want to do. I kind of like the charring to remain to some extent. So I basically did a little bit of brushing to lighten it up a little bit, and then very, very light sanding, not near to the extent that I did on this, in order to have the roof pattern show up. The source sheet will be on the PDF on the website, and this was not meant to be a all-inclusive description on how you do pyrography, but I just wanted to show you how I got the roofing done. And so good luck with it, and if you have any questions, feel free to give me a call. Thanks. One of the things that I forgot to mention, and we'll go over it right now, is that, you know, we had the base mounted in a chuck, and we got this tenon I've got to remove. So I'm going to show you how I remove it. It's not the only way to remove it, but it's the way that I do. I use this board top portion, and I put it in a chuck that has a 1-inch diameter jaw, and tighten it up. Let's see if I can get the wrench. Tighten up the end of it, and then I use a live center in the back to hold it true. Snug it just so it doesn't move, and then I use a spindle gouge to remove that tenon. And it comes out pretty nice. And now I've got the base pretty much finished. Again, you can sand it in this fashion as well. And you know, at this point, I use a spray lacquer for my finish when I'm completed. And the thing I like about that is that the spray lacquer will dry to the touch within 5-10 minutes, and you can respray, and within a half hour you can be at the point where you can start putting the mechanism into the pepper grind. So this is what we have. This is what we did. I'll entertain some questions. I understand there were some comments. We didn't get all the comments during the presentation that comment that I'm using the way of my lathe for tools. I don't do that normally. I put this curtain up so that we had something better than dirty garage in the background to show. And normally I have a bench in back of me. I just reach around and put my tools back there. So I ended up using the next best thing, which was a bench, part of the lathe that I didn't use. It was in back of the tailstock, so it's a little bit safer, but comments are valid. That is a place for your tools is not optimum. So, and neither is the top of the headstock. So anyway, so any questions?